I thought it was very important to take some time to discuss what's next, what will take place next in the Middle East, and how it will affect us, how it will affect you. Obviously, what has taken place in recent weeks and months, the beginning of the year 2011, has been drastic in the Middle East. There has been a radical overturn of the complete order of the Middle East, and I'm sure that this will continue in the years and months ahead. But I wanted to just walk through some of the relevant prophetic scriptures as they apply to what's taking place. Everyone keeps asking, are all of these events right now taking place with the riots, the revolts, the revolutions? Does this have any relevance with regard to biblical prophecy? And the answer is absolutely yes. And we're going to look at a few key passages in Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 and show how biblical prophecy has really quite clearly predicted these events. So I want to begin just with sort of a broad overview. Down throughout biblical history, and this is based on a few passages in Revelation 12 and 13, you've had God's redemptive plan, God's promised plan down through the ages. Again, He looked down, He chose a man, Abraham. He turned him into a family. He turned him into a nation which would become a holy womb that would give birth to the Messiah, through which the redemption would come to the earth. And this is spoken of in Revelation 12 as the woman that gives birth to the male child. And then in this picture you have Satan, the dragon, and he is perched before the woman. He desires to devour the woman and her male child. In very simple terms, Satan has always desired to thwart the plan of God in the earth. He wants to thwart God's plan of redemption. However, the Lord will win out in the end. This is not anything we have to worry about. Then as we shift to Revelation 13, you have the beast that comes out of the earth. And when we look at the passage, the beast itself is really a perfect mirror image of the dragon, of Satan. It's a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. And what we need to understand from this picture is that Satan's primary method of coming against God's plans in the earth, Satan's primary embodiment, or the vehicle that he uses to effect his purposes in the earth, has always been satanic empires, pagan world empires. Down throughout history, throughout natural and biblical history, Satan has worked through and in non-Christian or non-Jewish nations that have been filled with the same anti-Semitic, anti-Yahwistic, anti-Christic spirit. And that's what this beast with 7 heads is. The 7 heads represent 7 historical, biblical, pagan, satanic empires. This is essential to understand in terms of the broad pan-historical, pan-biblical unfolding of this cosmic clash between God's purposes and Satan's hand in the earth. So, which empires are they? And scholars are in nearly universal agreement on the fact that they are Egypt, again from the beginning of the Hebrew peoples in the land of Egypt. The Egyptian empire tried to destroy the Hebrew peoples, and then you had Assyria with the invasions of the land of Israel, and then Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, the Roman Empire, and then in the last days, the Islamic Empire, the various Islamic caliphates that together made up the Islamic Empire. These are the 7 primary satanic, persecuting, anti-Semitic empires of biblical history. And so we're going to zero in on Daniel 8 and then again on Daniel 11 and focus on how these prophecies, how these prophetic chapters, how these prophetic passages speak to the shifting of these various world empires, and then ultimately to what we're seeing today in the Middle East. So, beginning with Daniel 8, verses 3 through 4, it begins by describing the rise of the Medo-Persian Empire. Again, the Medo-Persian Empire came after the Babylonian Empire. And so verse 3, this is Daniel, I looked up, and there before me was a ram, a 2-horned ram, 2 horns standing beside the canal. And the horns were long, but one of the horns was longer than the other. It grew up later. And so this ram sort of has a lopsided thing happening, and it's the very, very same picture that was just portrayed in Daniel 7 with regard to the bear that's lopsided. He's up on one side because the Medo-Persian Empire was primarily dominated by the Persian side of the empire, and then the Median side of the empire was less significant. So this sort of lopsidedness of this empire is emphasized both in Daniel 7 and then again here in Daniel 9. And then Daniel says, I watched the ram as he charged toward the west and toward the north and toward the south, and no animal could stand against him, and none could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, he became great. So this goat, the rise of the Medo-Persian Empire, it came forth, it spread out in every direction, and it spread throughout the entirety of the entire Middle East, really from Europe, sweeping all the way across to India, and then even down into Egypt. The Medo-Persian Empire was a vast empire. Beginning with verse 5. And as I was thinking about this, suddenly, now we have another animal, a goat. A goat with a very prominent horn between its eyes came from the west. It's a unicorn goat, one big horn. It comes from the west. It crosses the whole earth without touching the ground. It's a super unicorn goat, flying through the air. It came toward the two-horned ram that I had seen standing beside the canal, and it charged at it with great rage. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its two horns. So now this singular horned goat is destroying the two-horned ram. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. So what we have here is in this strange story, this strange symbolism, we have a biblical description of the changing of the guard as the Greek Alexandrian Empire conquered the Medo-Persian Empire. The singular horn that came out of the goat was Alexander the Great. He swept out of Macedonia, out of Europe, across the Middle East, and conquered the entire Medo-Persian Empire. He swept out of Europe all the way across the Middle East and conquered the Medo-Persian Empire. And then what happened was suddenly, history tells us that Alexander the Great developed a fever, and at the height of his power, he suddenly died. He had conquered this whole region, suddenly he died. Daniel 8 verses 8, the goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. So again, Alexander the Great dies, and then what you had were the Diadochi, which just simply means the successors. So these were the generals that after Alexander the Great died, they began to fight it out. They're duking it out for control of this vast empire. Initially, there were 4 primary generals that were fighting for control of Alexander's Greek empire. And then really they continued to duel it out until there were really only 2 primary rulers of the region. And the most significant of the 2 was the ruler of this empire, or the dynasty or the kingdom called the Seleucid dynasty. And the Seleucid dynasty swept from Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, all the way down through Syria, modern-day Iraq, Iran, all the way over into Afghanistan and Pakistan. And that whole northern swath right across the Middle East was controlled by the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus Epiphanes. And then down in the south, down in Egypt, in northern Africa, you had the Ptolemaic kingdom, and that was Ptolemy. And so what you then have is the playing out of the clash between the Seleucid Empire, the king of the north, and the king of the south, the Ptolemaic Empire. Daniel 8, verses 9 through 12. Out of one of them came another horn. So what happens is the Bible begins by telling this historical outplaying of events, and it's speaking of Antiochus Epiphanes, but then it begins to shift. It begins to shift and say these historical events that took place in in the outplaying of these various battles between the king of the north and the king of the south, Antiochus Epiphanes and Ptolemy. They will be played out yet again in the last days. And these ancient events will play out again before our eyes. We will see yet again the consolidation of a kingdom in the north and then a kingdom emerging from the south that will eventually lead to a military clash between the two. We're going to look at the scriptures. Daniel 8, verses 9 through 12. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land. The beautiful land is the land of Israel. It grew until it reached the host of heavens, and it threw some of the starry host down to the earth and trampled on them. It uses very antichrist language, very satanic language here, describing this individual more than just a man. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. Again, the Antichrist sets himself up in the temple of God as if he is God. It took away the daily sacrifice. The Antichrist will set up the abomination that causes desolation in the temple, and the daily offerings will they will cease for a time. And then the Lord's sanctuary was thrown down as a result of the activity of this little horn that emerges out of one of these four initial divisions of the Alexandrian Greek Empire. And again, this particular horn, this significant horn that starts small but grows in power, is the Northern Alliance, the Seleucid Empire, Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a type of the Antichrist. And now we're sort of zooming in on the Antichrist element. This individual, this little horn, prospers in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. The consistent testimony of the Scriptures is that God himself will actually allow the Antichrist to prosper. He prospered in everything that he did. He will be given power to overcome the saints. He will beat the holy people down. He will succeed in crushing the power of the holy ones. The Lord will allow this to happen because he will allow us the opportunity to embrace suffering in order to purge us of unrighteousness. Even as he will shake all of the earth, even as he will shake all things, the Lord will use the activity of the Antichrist in the earth to purge the church of unrighteousness in order that we can, like our Master, enter through suffering before we enter into share in the glory of the Messiah in the age to come. Now we skip forward to Daniel 11, and again it's speaking of the Antichrist. We're beginning with verse 36. It says, the king, this is the Antichrist. Now what's happened in Daniel 11 is the same thing that just happened in Daniel 8. It begins with a historical outplay of these various military coalitions, the king of the north and the king of the south. They're historical, but then all of a sudden it shifts, and it shifts to focus toward the end times, to the Antichrist. So here in verse 36 in 11, Daniel 11, the shift to the Antichrist is now taken place. The king, the Antichrist, will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. The Antichrist will speak monstrous things against the God of the Bible. And he will prosper. Notice this again. He will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. And then it lays out this fourfold theological statement, this fourfold statement of belief. And the first thing is that he will show no regard for the God of his fathers. Now, what a lot of people have done is they've looked at this and they've said, so he rejects the God of his fathers. So his father was one particular religion, or his grandfather was a particular religion, but he's a different religion. That's not at all what the Bible's saying. When the Bible uses this phrase, the God of his fathers, it's always, every time the Bible uses this phrase, it's always the God of his fathers, Elohim Ab, comma, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is a specific reference to the God of the Bible. And so then people say, okay, I understand that, so that means the Antichrist must be Jewish. Not at all. Well, why? He rejects the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He must be Jewish. No. Very simple. Father Abraham had many sons had. Okay, so Abraham had sons other than Isaac, right? He also had Ishmael. And so if, in fact, the Antichrist were an Ishmaelite, whether physically or just a spiritual descendant the children of Ishmael, Ishmael really in many ways being the father of the Islamic religion, then likewise, the Antichrist as a spiritual or physical Ishmaelite could reject the God of his fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Bible. So, he rejects the God of the Bible. Secondly, he rejects the desire of women. What does this mean? In my opinion, and based on all of my studies, rabbinic thought views this phrase, the desire of women, as a reference to the yearning of every Jewish woman that they would be the one that would give birth to the Messiah, the one that would bring redemption to the earth, and which was ultimately fulfilled in Mary, who, she submitted to the will of God, and then she, just breaks out in song, praising God. My soul doth rejoice and magnify the Lord, and so forth. Now, there's other ways of interpreting this. The popular thing is saying, oh, this guy must be a homosexual. The Antichrist is going to be a gay Frenchman. Personally, I think that what we're looking at here is a fourfold theological statement. So first it makes a comment about the God that he rejects. He rejects the God of the Bible. He rejects the desire of women. Who's that? That's the Messiah. He rejects the Messiah. He rejects God the Father, God the Son. And then it says, and he will show no regard for any other god. In other words, all the other gods of the earth, he shows no regard for them either, for he will even magnify himself above them all. So now he rejects the God of the Bible, he rejects the Messiah, he rejects the Father, the Son, he rejects all the other gods, he magnifies them, but then there's this incredibly important point. But instead, he will honor a God. He will honor a God, and it calls this God the God of fortresses. Here's what he rejects: God the Father, God the Son, every other God. Who is his God? It's called the God of fortresses. It's the God of war, a God of jihad. This very well could describe a Muslim. There's been a lot of different ways that people have looked at this. I believe he is making a fourfold theological statement. I also believe that John the Apostle in 1 John 2:22, when he specifically describes the theology of the Antichrist, and he says, this is the Antichrist, he denies the Father and the Son, I believe that he got this directly from Daniel 11. Because this is the passage in the Old Testament that specifically details the theology of the Antichrist. And later, when John discusses those things in the New Testament, I believe that this is the passage that he pulled this from. So, he is a God that rejects he is a man that rejects the God of the Bible. He rejects Jesus. All the other gods of the earth, he does worship and honor the God of fortresses, a God that his fathers, again, Father Abraham, did not know. This is not the God of Islam, is not the God of Abraham. It is the gods that Abraham left behind in the desert to seek after the one true God. So the Antichrist honors this God, this foreign God, with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. Verse 39, the Antichrist will take action against the strongest of fortresses with the help, again, of this foreign God, this God of fortresses, and he will give great honor to those who acknowledge him, and he will cause them to rule over many. If men will acknowledge the Antichrist, he then gives them authority to rule over others, and he parcels out land, in the midst of this land, for a price. Now watch this. At the time of the end, clearly, this is at the time of the end, and it says the king of the north, or the king of the south, I'm sorry, will collide with him. So now what we're zeroing in on, we had the historical, these events took place. Alexander conquers the Middle East. He dies. His generals divide up the land. There's 4 of them. Out of one of them, one of these generals becomes very prominent. He rules the whole northern swatch of the Middle East, from Turkey through Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. That whole northern alliance, the Seleucid Empire, that's the king of the north. And then it says, at the time of the end, the king of the south will clash with the Antichrist. The king of the south, again, is the Ptolemaic kingdom, the northern African alliance, the Egyptian, Libyan, Sudanese alliance that is in northern Africa. At the end times, the king of the south will collide with the Antichrist. And then the Antichrist, the king of the north, will storm out against him with chariots and horsemen, with many ships. The Antichrist will enter many countries, overflow them, and pass through like a flood. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall. The Antichrist will clash. The king of the north, the king of the south will clash. The king of the north will win this military conflict, consolidating his regional power, and then at that time he invades the land of Israel. Many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the foremost sons of Ammon. It seems to indicate, based on the grouping of these three names, that it's probably pointing to the modern-day nation of Jordan. Why would Jordan escape from the attack of the Antichrist? We don't know. We're not even sure if that's exactly what it's clearly speaking of, but it seems to be. Why will this take place? Time will tell. Verse 42, then he will stretch out his hand against other countries. The land of Egypt will not escape. So there's this military clash. Egypt will be conquered by the king of the north. In these last days, we will see the consolidation of the northern alliance, the reconsolidation of the ancient Seleucid Empire, which will clash with the king of the south, which will clash with the Egyptian king of the south, and Egypt will not escape. The Antichrist will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold, silver, and all the precious things of Egypt. The Antichrist will win that battle. Likewise, the Libyans and the Cushites, the Sudanese, will follow at his heels. So the Antichrist conquers Egypt, Libya, and Sudan. The North African coalition will be defeated by the king of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran. The northern king will defeat that southern alliance. And then it says, but rumors from the east and the north will disturb him. Russia, China, north and east, we're not sure. It disturbs him. He will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. And then it says, he will pitch his tents, the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and none will help him. The Antichrist will be destroyed. So what we have here, what we've just walked through, is, again, this ancient clash that took place between the Seleucid Empire, the Seleucid kingdom, and the southern kingdom will replay itself in the last days. The Antichrist will be victorious, consolidating his control of the Middle East. Now what I want to do is just bring everyone up to modern speed and just sort of walk through the Middle East, walk through some of the various nations to understand how everything that's taking place right now in the Middle East applies to these passages that we've just looked at. Are any of these things coming together? I mean, is this lining up with what the Bible says? And I would say absolutely. I mean, in an astonishing way. Sitting back, watching this unfold has been nothing short of astonishing. And in fact, when we can communicate these things with clarity to believers, opening up the Scriptures, having a Bible study, showing them that the things taking place in the earth are clearly prophesied in the Bible, and that these things are happening right before our eyes, that is a powerful apologetic to the truthfulness of this book. So, we're looking at a map of the Middle East. Put yourself in the position of your average Sunni Muslim. Again, Sunnis are the majority sect. And in 1924, the government of Islam, the empire of Islam, the caliphate, was brought to a close. It was abolished. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the secular reformer from Turkey, abolished this empire, and he beheaded it when he abolished the office of the caliph. The caliph is the military, political, and religious leader of the entire Islamic world. The Pope, President, General, wrapped up into one. Ataturk abolished that office, abolished the empire, and suddenly, I mean, picture if you're a Catholic and there's no Pope for 80 years. So now put yourself in the position of this Sunni Islamist. You're in that region. You desire to see the reestablishment of the caliphate. And so for the past 30 years, this is the order of the Middle East. You have to understand the order of the Middle East, the old order, how things have been and how things have suddenly shifted. So you're sitting there and you look out. You say, where is my hope? Who can reestablish the caliphate? So the first thing you do is you look to what is called the Arab bloc. And the Arab bloc for the past 30 years has been Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. These three nations together are referred to as the Arab bloc. And you say, could these three nations revive the caliphate? And you go, no way. Because these three nations, and this is the view of most, most Islamists throughout the region, you say, these three nations are led by self-interested Western puppet regimes. Saudi Arabia as well as Jordan are run by corrupt, non-Islamic monarchies. A kingdom or a monarchy for the Islamist is a Western imposed, imported idea. There's no room within Islamic theology for a monarchy. And so they go, this is non-Islamic. And then in Egypt, you had Mubarak, you had this, again, self-interested, autocratic dictator. Again, a Western puppet regime, you would say. And then you say Jordan and Egypt, they have peace treaties with Israel, i.e. the great Satan. No way these guys can revive the caliphate. There's no way. There's no way these guys could do it. So where else? Where else can I look for hope? So now you cast your hopes over the Persian Gulf and you look to the nation of Iran. You say, could these guys do it? You say, well, let's see. They're incredibly courageous. They're just very bold. They thumb their nose at the United States. They thumb their nose at Israel. They're very open about, rebuking the great Satans in the earth. And you go, I like that. I like that. And then you go, on the other hand, they're Shia. In other words, they're heretical, and they're kind of crazy. And so you go, gosh, I just have to keep waiting for some new guy to emerge on the scene. But for now, there's really no one that I can look to, with expectation that will revive the caliphate. Suddenly, overnight, in the nation of Turkey, in the past several years, something dramatic has been taking place. Something dramatic has been taking place. So what's taken place in Turkey since really beginning in 2003? You have had the rise of the AK party, sometimes called the AK party by the American expatriates there in Turkey. It's translated as the Justice and Development Party, and it's often referred to as a moderate Islamist party. Here's what they've done. Through democracy, through elections, they have taken these various seats. They've taken the seat of the presidency. They've taken the seat of the prime minister. They've gained a majority, the vast majority of the seats in parliament. They passed legislation only recently that allows them to completely rewrite the Turkish constitution. Completely rewrite the Turkish constitution, giving them massive new powers over the military. So historically, Ataturk, when he established Kemalism in Turkey, his belief was that the only way that Turkey would ever be able to compete with the Western Judeo-Christian powers that were prospering so well with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, etc., he believed that it was only by really excluding Islam from the government and secularizing the nation that Turkey could compete. So he established this ingenious system of checks and balances with the military having radical power, able to really cast off the government if they got too Islamic. And that's always been the system, and it's worked. For 80 years, it worked very effectively. Now, however, the Islamists in Turkey have gained the ability, they've passed legislation which gives them sweeping powers over the military, really the final stepping stone that they need to overcome to really gain the entire country. Not only that, but over the past few years, there's been the unfolding of two conspiracies. One was called Ergenekon, and the other was called Baykal. And what these two conspiracies were was the Islamist government accused well over 200 of the top military leaders of being involved in this conspiracy to blow up various things through the country and blame the Islamist government. There's no evidence of it, or the evidence that does exist is extremely sketchy. But through these, what everyone seems to believe are completely contrived conspiracies, the Islamist Party has literally arrested well over 200 of the top Turkish military leaders, and they have now put their own Islamist military leaders over the military. So again, picture this in terms of the United States. You have a guy, he comes in, they take, I know we don't have a prime minister, but they've taken the prime minister, they've taken the presidency, they've taken the parliament, they've taken the military. Then they've set their own guys in all of the seats, the judge seats, throughout the judiciary. They've put the Islamists in as judges. Every branch branch by branch, they have taken over. The police throughout Turkey is completely filled with what's called the Gülenists. The Gülenists are the Islamists. All of the leaders of the Turkish government are Gülenists. They're Islamists. So on the local level, the police have been taken over. And then what's the final straw? The final straw is the media, the journalists. And so then here you have the two largest critical news outlets in the country. One of them gets hit by the Islamist government with a $23 billion fine. $23 billion fine against this one media outlet. And then the other one, just interestingly enough, is now run by the son of the Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And this guy has been a masterful player over the past few years. And in no way am I trying to infer that this guy is the Antichrist, but clearly a forerunner to what's taking place, what will take place in Turkey. A very, very cunning individual. So they've taken over all of these things, and in the midst of this, what else has been happening? The rise of an Islamist government in what has historically been the most secular, moderate, democratic nation in the whole region. This is the nation that we in the West have said we need to replicate the model of Turkey throughout the region. We want to see all the nations adopt the model of Turkey, but instead of the other nations adopting Turkey, Turkey has adopted the Islamist model of the rest of the region. And it is Prime Minister Erdogan who has stated, he has this famous quote where he said, democracy is like a streetcar. You get on until it gets you where you need to get, and then you get off. And he has used democracy up until this point in the same way that all the other Islamist nations of the region have used democracy. In Lebanon, they use democracy, and Hezbollah, the Islamist terrorist organization, has risen to the top. In Gaza, through democracy, it's Hamas that has risen to the top. In Turkey, through democracy, the AK party has risen to the top. When you give an Islamic-dominated nation the ability to vote, eventually the Islamists rise to the top. This will happen in Egypt. It will happen everywhere where they kick out the self-interested autocratic dictators. You know, it's one evil for another much greater evil. This is what's taking place in the Middle East. So, Islamist takeover of Turkey. In the midst of this, you've had a drastic, fantastic economy rising throughout this whole time. Turkey has very consciously extended its paternal influence throughout the region, trying to revive the Ottoman Empire. Turkey ruled the entire Middle East as the Ottoman Empire for over 500 years. And their memories in this regard are very fresh, and there is a deep Turkish nationalism that exists among even the secular Turks. They desire to revive the glory days of the Turkish Empire. And so suddenly that Islamist that is sitting there looking to the Arab bloc and to the Iranian Shia bloc, and they see no hope, all of a sudden overnight there is a new alternative, there is a third party, there is a new strong horse, and suddenly the attention and the affections and the hopes and the dreams of much of the Islamic world is looking to Turkey, and Turkey is all too willing to receive it. And in just kind of a goofy, interesting point, Prime Minister Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, now has more Facebook friends than any other leader in the entire Middle East. I think I was reading an article where Ahmadinejad, who is very popular because of his stance against Israel, he had 43,000 friends on Facebook. Prime Minister Erdogan had nearly 500,000. So, I mean, you know, this guy is extremely popular. And so what we've seen in recent years is we've seen the coming together of the Northern Bloc, the King of the North. We've seen Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. In all of these various ways, they've been breaking down their borders, removing the visa requirements. You can flow freely from one nation to the other. They've been entering into all sorts of economic and security alliances. That northern alliance is forming. The Turks have been very active. They've been on the move. And then suddenly overnight, the riots, the revolutions, the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia, the overturn of northern Africa, Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, riots in Yemen. And we're seeing, and I believe in the years ahead, we will see the consolidation of the southern bloc, the king of the south. Because while Turkey views itself as the most natural leader of the region, it views itself as the nation that deserves to rule the region because it has the history, Egypt also views itself as the nation that deserves to rule the region. They have there in Cairo Al-Azhar University. This is the world headquarters of Sunni Islamic scholarship. They think they are the, or they are really the intellectual capital of Islamic scholarship, and they believe that they are the nation most worthy of the role of the regional leader. However, Turkey will not seek to that. And as Turkey tries to extend and continues to expand its power base in the region, Egypt will resist. And that North African, Egyptian led alliance, the southern kingdom, the southern alliance led by Egypt, will eventually clash with Turkey. I believe this is what the Bible's saying. I believe this is what we'll see. And then history shows that after this clash, the king of the north invaded the land of Israel. And there's going to be a lot of twists and turns, and there's different things that we haven't got into that need to take place in that time. But I believe that the events taking place in the Middle East today are absolutely fulfilling biblical prophecy. And in the days to come, these things will only continue to come together even more so. So again, Jesus commanded us to understand the prophecies of the Scriptures, to look out into the world, to understand the signs of the times. And hopefully this study has empowered you and helped you to do that just a little bit better as we eagerly look for, long for, and await the coming of the Messiah. Amen.